Faith always impacts my daily life. It impacts everything I do. It impacts how I talk to my children and how I teach them to walk in God's paths and to walk the path that they do. And praying is something that I learned from my mother, and I learned also from my father, but I really remember the way my mother did it, because something would happen and she'd say, stop, everybody stop, we're going to pray now for this now. And it's something I carried on with my children. I remember sometimes my children would be, Mom, really now? Can't we just do it at supper time later? It's not. And now they look at me and they say, you were so right. So, which is also nice to hear. I am Lizbee Forster, and I grew up in South Africa. My parents are missionaries. My mother is American and my dad is Dutch, and they were sent out by a Dutch Reformed Church to South Africa and worked under the Zulus. That's the environment I grew up with Bible-believing parents who were very focused on bringing the gospel to other people, to the people around them, in everything that they did in their daily life, in the way they treated us, but also the way they treated other people. I am the oldest of 6, so I have one brother under me and another 4 sisters. I grew up in a Christian home, so for me, faith was always there, believing in God and the stories and everything. And I really would say, in that sense, there wasn't really a pinpoint that I would evangelize the neighbors' children and people at school when I was young, and I really felt that I was a Christian. I do have one point where I know that there was really a turning point as such. It's when me and my brother were waiting for my mother to pick us up from boarding school, and my brother turns to me and he says, are you going to heaven? And I looked at him and I said, well, I'm not sure. He said, well, if you're not sure, you're not going. And I was like, no way. Now I need to make sure. And so and after that, I committed. It's not like I don't feel like it was a turning point in the sense that I was a non-Christian to a Christian, because I really had taken on the faith, but it was a point where I really made the decision for myself. It was my decision, and I just started high school, and I started really making an effort to go to the Christian organization that was in the high school, and I really was working at my faith. And I remember a couple of things from high school in that way. We once had a speaker for the whole high school, actually, and I remember it really he talked about faith and everything, and then he said, you need to pray for your future spouse. And I remember that comment so vividly. I don't know. So from that moment I prayed for, whoever God was going to have for me, and that he would also be, help him along in his life. And I have done that kind of praying for my children too, and for the friends that they would make in life, that God would bring alongside them Christian friends that would help them in their faith walk. After I was in high school, I went to university in South Africa. I started a music major, did conservatorium. A fun fact is that when I was young, and people asked me, what do you want to become? I mean, in primary school, and when other children would say, I want to become a fire engine firefighter or a policeman, people would ask me, and I would always say, I want to play the piano in church. I never really got there, but I did play piano in high school. I had it as a subject, and I went to conservatorium, and I mainly used my voice and have really felt that I have in a lot of ways also used it to God's glory in some of the things that I did. So I was studying music, and in my second year, I think I started taking one psychology subject, and I added more psychology subjects, and I finally ended up with a major in music and psychology. So kind of a hybrid degree. And then I went on to do psychometry in psychology, the testing. And then I got to a point, and I was like, I know all these psychological theories about Freud and Rogers, and but where does faith actually come into this? I even though I was at a Christian university, I found it difficult to match all these actually very non-Christian ways of thinking and what I'd been taught with my Christianity. And so I decided to go to seminary. And as a girl in South Africa, that was a bit more difficult, so I went to America. Studied theology. I was in America from just 2 years. Having an American mother also helped, of course, because I did have an American passport. So but I was seen as a missionary kid, so I got a bursary as well because I was an MK. So that helps. That helps in life too. And I got to, in that time, really connect with my grandparents who lived in the States, because in the summertime I worked close to my grandparents and lived with them for that while, which I really thank God for, because it was a moment it was the only moment I've seen them a little bit with traveling and so on to visit, but then it's just very short, and this was somewhat longer, which was really nice. But then after 2 years, I had a master's in general theology with a counseling concentration, and I had to make a decision of what I was going to do in life, and I didn't quite have the finances to go back home again, so I was like, okay, so what am I going to do? And there was somebody who came to the seminary. There was this, like what do you call that in English? A job market, basically, all sorts of organizations that came to the university. And I went around, and there was one, Greater Europe Mission, who was promoting things, and they were like, well, which mission field would you want to go to, which country? I said, well, I wouldn't mind going to Holland, since that's also in my background, because my dad is Dutch. And so I went to Holland for a summer program, just one summer. But it became a longer period of time. The couple that I worked with, actually, they asked me at the end of that summer to stay and to commit to a 2-year period of working with a youth group. And I was like, wow, but I didn't, I was going to go back to the States and study more. I had a little bit of an idea what I wanted to do, but not well enough so God, I looked at God and I was like, okay, Lord, I guess 2 years is not that long, I'll stay. So I stayed for a 2-year period in Holland. Coming to Holland at that point, as I said, I was looking for them, going to church, from churches to church. And I had quite a lot of the money together, but not quite everything. And I know that the minister who was working for Greater Europe Mission phoned me from Holland, and he said, well, are you coming? Because you haven't yet quite committed. And I said, well, I don't have quite all the money, but I do feel like God is giving me the money slowly, so I will say yes, I am coming. And it gave me also peace. I was like, yes, but I got to like a day before I was going to the course that we needed to do before we were sent on the mission trip, the summer mission trip. And I did not quite have all the money together that I needed. And I was like, Lord, you are an amazing God, and you are everlasting, but you are putting me on my toes. And I at the end of church time, we were drinking coffee and so on, and a woman that I've seen some, but an older lady who sometimes asked how I was doing and so on, knew I was studying theology and so on. She said, well, how are you doing and what are you doing this summer? And I said, well, I'm going with the Greater Europe Mission trip to Europe, and we'll be working in Holland. And she said, well, what can I pray for you for? I said, well, I don't quite have all the money together that I need for the trip. And she looked at me, she took out her checkbook and she wrote a check and she closed it, she put it in an envelope, she licked it, closed the envelope, she closed the envelope, and she gave it to me. I said, thank you very much. And then I went home and I opened up the envelope and it was exactly the amount I needed. I mean, exactly. I was like, God, you are, come on. So that's been a moment which I've often remembered, because I know the feeling I had, going into a situation like, okay, I don't know how to do this exactly, and what am I going to tell them, because I don't have all the money that I'm supposed to have exactly, kind of having committed and not, having it all worked out. But God came through. God was not finished with me yet. Towards the end of that 2-year period, I met my husband. And to finance the time that I was here, because I had recruited finances while I was in the States to come on that summer program by going, around the churches and having people support me. But I didn't have enough for 2 years. So a couple of the people carried on supporting me, but it was not enough to do. So I was like, so what am I going to do to finance this, this thing? So I went, at that point you still had studiefinanciering in Holland, and you had quite a lot of it. So, or it wasn't that much, but it was enough to add. So I thought I'd go back to school again, because I didn't mind studying, and I did all the subjects that I missed for the pedagogy side of psychology. So I did what in Dutch you call orthopedagogiek, but it's more the pedagogical side of the psychology. And so towards the end of my studies, I was doing my thesis, and because Dutch is not my first language, and I started struggling a bit with how to write things, and the people I was living with at that time invited Roy, my husband, to come and eat with us for one night. And I had met him once or twice maybe before that period of time, but I was like, come on, I don't need to meet him now. What are you guys doing? It looked like a setup, which it was, but so I was a bit and then halfway during the evening they went upstairs, and I was like, okay, this is really a setup. But he offered to help me with my thesis, and I really needed the help. So I said to him, okay, I'll take your help, because I can't do it without it. And so he helped me with my thesis, and he kept on saying to me, it's okay, if this is all that God wants me to do, I will just help you with your thesis. But obviously that was not quite all that that God wanted. God had more ideas than we thought we did. Well, than I thought we did at the beginning. And we got to a point where I had been doing an internship for the studies, and I was done with it, and I was saying goodbye, and the company said to me, well, you've done a really good job, we would like to offer you a job. And I looked at them and I thought, God, what are you doing now? And I thought, okay, I'm taking the job. And in that split second, because it was really just I looked at him and I said, I'm taking the job. And I knew I was changing everything. I had a ticket to go back to South Africa. I'd started a study to do a PhD in counseling. I had planned things. I'm a planner. I had planned it all out. I knew what I was going to do. But in that moment, I knew that that's not what God had in mind for me. I made it, and I phoned Roy and I said, I've decided, I've taken a job. I said, do you know what that means? Yeah, and so, but yeah. Well, there was not really a relationship yet, in the sense that we had spent a lot of time together, but we had both, well, he had, I don't think that he actually believed this, but he kept on saying to me, this is just so that I can help you. If that's all that God wants me to do, then I will just help you with the thesis. Saying yes to that job here, and it was it was like, I'm staying, I'm committing to staying. It was the moment that I really looked at myself and thought, okay, you've been lying to yourself. This whole plan is just, you're going to have to throw it in the bin and, and let God take over. Yeah, there are more points in my life where I would say we had a moment during our lives when Roy lost his job. He'd actually gotten sick, and then he had lost his job sort of because of it, and whatever it was. I won't go into that, but it was over a 2-year period. He did do some work, but he couldn't find a job. So and I had just had Jody, so I wasn't working at that point either, and I didn't have any. So we had basically no income, and it just amazes me how God brought us through that period, because we had people just knock on the back door and say, can we come in? We decided as a family to put some money in an envelope, and here it is for you. And we would be like, wow, this will pay the mortgage for the next month. And then I've had people come to the door, and then the potato farmer came to the door just before Sinterklaas, and he said, here's it was a huge bag of potatoes. I don't know how many kilos, but it was a big bag. And he said, somebody sent this to you. I said, well, who? He said, well, they told me to tell you it was Sinterklaas. I was like, who's Sinterklaas? I still don't know who Sinterklaas is. But there were other moments. We came back from celebrating Sinterklaas that same year with the family, and we came back home. It was just before Jody was born, so I was pregnant, and then he was born in that period. And the whole kitchen was full of shopping crates, and we were like, who had our key and could get into the house? And the boxes were filled with shopping, with gifts for the children, with nappies, with all sorts of things. They were just the whole kitchen. We couldn't walk through the kitchen because it was full, and we didn't have that small kitchen. So it was, and later I found out, because I worked out who had the key, there was actually non-Christian friends and people from the primary school that the kids went to, and a number of couples and their parents. So it wasn't just the couples that I knew, but also their parents. 3 or 4 couples had gotten together and decided to help in that way. And but it just came from all sorts. There was a moment when we got like a huge bag of flour, because I always made my bread in that time because it was cheaper and it was just, we got through it by, this kind of thing. And the kids still remember, they look back at that period as it being an amazing period. And I would say it was too. I don't remember any real stress or anything. And it was, as such, it was somewhat stressful, but I don't remember it that way. Because God was just so good. It was, you were like, okay, God, what's going to be the next thing? Yeah. Faith always impacts my daily life. It always has. At home with my children, but even in my job, the choices I make, and whether or not I talk about faith at work. I'm an educational psychologist, and I do testing and so on. But working in schools, it means you're not always allowed to share your faith, because there's certain rules about that. But with my colleagues and parents, you can sometimes share about faith. And I don't always do it, but I do. If the moment opens itself, I do try and talk about what I believe. And having actually having the fact that I did a theology degree on my CV means I can't get out of immediately saying, I mean, they read my CV and they're like, okay, so tell us. You're a Christian. I don't have to say it, which is kind of useful. I've also had moments when my boss phoned me and he said, I have this moral dilemma and I would really like to ask you for an opinion. And I was like, God, wow, you know, yeah. Realizing sometimes that you're wrong. I mean, it's something that I've had to work on through my life, but turning around and thinking, okay, I said something I shouldn't have said, or I have done something that I shouldn't have done, and turning around and saying, you know, I said that wrong, I shouldn't have said that, or would you forgive me for this? Or it's like a conscious decision to really ask for forgiveness from the people around me. And I know that, for example, the story of David with Bathsheba, I look at that story and I think, no way. How did you, at the end of your life, turn out to be the man where God said, you know, you followed in God's steps? And if you look at that Bathsheba story where he looked at her and he brought her to him, and you know the story. And then he wrote Psalm 55 and he said, create in me a clean heart, O God. And there's a song about that too. And I think if he could ask for forgiveness for that and get it, I mean, we can ask, I mean, for the small things we do, you know, forgiveness is there for everything.